Now 1. A house is like an old box in an attic, hidden for decades. Then some unsuspecting party comes along and opens it. Landis Woodley's house was like that. Like a museum full of memories and memorabilia. A place that kept. It was also a house that didn't want to be found. Clint Stockbern discovered it only after weeks of research and legwork. No easy task, the damn place had no number. Clint knew the old man had ripped the number down in 1964 to throw off the IRS agents. They found him, of course. They always do. A faded "No Solicitors" sign hung askew next to a doorbell from which the button had been removed. But that didn't slow Clint down. He'd expected obstacles like that. If the stories were true, Landis Woodley would be a man of few charms. He'd left a list of enemies almost as long as his list of creditors. He hated the United States Postal Service and refused to empty his mailbox for months on end. The route man had given up with the junk mail. The only stuff he ever got now was official. Bills, collection notices, tax liens, legal crap. Never a letter, so it was easy for all of Clint's hand-addressed envelopes to go unopened. They ended up with the rest of the correspondence in the fireplace. Landis didn't go out much. He had a feeble-minded gardener's son named Emil who worked for him and lived on the property. Clint had been combing the Hollywood Hills for days looking for Landis Woodley's home. He worked the area behind Beechwood Canyon, cruising through the ostentatious show houses built in the 1920s. From concrete European castles to masonite antebellum southern mansions, the film industry had brought some rather strange fetishes from the backlots to the construction sites. Most of the places looked like movie sets. Clint's rusty VW Bug labored up and down the winding canyon roads while Clint craned his neck to read the addresses. He was 22 years old and almost handsome behind the faded acne scars and styleless glasses. He had a determined, earnest face, and most people liked him. Clint passed unnoticed through the neighborhood, patiently driving the search grid he'd plotted the night before. He eventually found the house with the help of old newspaper clippings about the wild parties that used to go on there. He learned that actress Vivian Loring, a neighbor of Woodley's, used to complain about the noise. Locating her house was not difficult, and from there he fanned out until he found the Woodley estate. The old man had miraculously kept his address out of the paper for years. Landis Woodley's house tried to blend into a hill at the end of a tricky cul-de-sac. You couldn't actually see it from the road, although you did get a glimpse of tile roof. Clint had to walk down a flight of mossy steps to get to the huge front door. Constructed of rough grey stucco, the place looked as though it hadn't been painted in decades. The only visible windows were as small and grimy as portholes on a tramp steamer. Clint knocked for at least 15 minutes and was about to give up when a mailbox slot-sized view window screeched open and a pair of bloodshot eyes appeared. "What do you want?" "Mr. Woodley? Go away." "Mr. Landis Woodley? No Woodley here. I have a proposition for you." The 4-inch square wrought-iron window closed with the scream of chalk on a chalkboard. Shut out. Clint stepped back, away from the massive grey edifice that jutted from the withered hillside. He'd expected that too. The guy was a pro, after all, the king of the recluses. Clint used the opportunity to check out the big building from a different angle. It rose above him like an amusement park ride, a cracked and forlorn stucco structure largely hidden by untended trees and tangled shrubbery. LA shimmered in the background. He walked down a narrow, overgrown sidewalk along the side and calibrated the size of the building. It stood 3 levels high and appeared to be in worse condition when viewed from the side. Dead vines clung to rotting trellises and pointed into the slate-grey sky. The stucco walls were veined with cracks and discolored by a dry black moss. The house had been tastelessly refurbished in the early 60s. Sliding doors, wooden decks, A cheesy bird bath and some terribly inappropriate landscaping had been added, all of it now in a state of advanced decay, and the combination of old and cheap was disorienting. Clint heard a door open on one of the 2 decks above him. He heard the old man cough, then hock a brownish loogie over the side. It would have dropped into the near-dead yellow-brown shrubs that grew out of the hill 100 feet below the property, but the wind blew it back toward the house under the deck. Much to Clint's consternation, it sailed in his direction and landed with an unhealthy splat at his feet. He winced. Clint considered going back to the front door and knocking again, but he knew that would be a waste of time. He crept, cat-like, looking for an alternative entrance. Some plank steps led up to the first of the 2 decks. Calculating from the hang time on the loogie, Clint fixed Landis's position to be on the upper deck, at least 2 stories above. He put a foot on the first step and tested his weight on the wood. It creaked and bent in protest at his 150-pound body. "Who's that?" a phlegmy voice called. Clint froze. Who the fuck's down there? He considered trying to sneak off, but knew his chances of getting inside would not improve with that strategy. Better to confront the problem directly. He was still choosing his words when the old man shouted, "Stop right there. I'm warning you, whoever you are, I've got a gun, and I'll blow your goddamn head off if you take one more step." "It's me, Mr. Woodley, Clint Stockbern. I was just at the front door." "What the hell do you want?" "I want to talk to you, that's all." There was a pause. Then Clint heard another extended bout of coughing. The cough trailed into his words. "No talk, go home." Clint worked his way to the edge of the steps, hooked his arm on the railing, and swung out over the hill. Looking up, he could see the unshaven, dour visage of Landis Woodley. "Sir, if I could just have a few minutes of your time. I work for Monster magazine, and I'd like to interview you." The answer came back disappointingly fast. "I don't do interviews." "I understand that, sir. The press hasn't exactly been kind to you over the years." "I can relate to your attitude." Landis cleared his throat. Clint got the distinct feeling he was loading up for another loogie. "Speak English, punk." "I have a check for $500 here in my pocket. That's what my publication is willing to offer you for a 3-hour interview." Silence. He must be considering the offer, thought Clint. "I'm home free." "You're not a cop?" "No, sir." "IRS? Process server?" "No, sir." More coughing. Clint saw a blue plume of dense cigar smoke billow and rise above him. A match fluttered in the wind. Clint waited. He was prepared to wait all day. He'd been pursuing this story for too long to give up now. At least now his offer was on the table. "Not enough," came the brusque reply. What? Where was this old shit coming from? $500 was damn good money, nearly twice the going rate for this type of thing. "All right, 600, that's as high as I can go. I'll put in the extra 100 from my own money." Clint hated to use his own meager resources, but a story was a story, and he'd already invested too much time in this one. "My editor, Ms. Bachman, wants this story, sir, and I'm prepared to—" "Wait a second. Roberta Bachman." "Yes, sir." "Roberta Louise Bachman from Melrose Avenue." "Yes, sir." "Well, I'll be damned. You know her?" Clint smiled, squinting up at the old man, trying to be pleasant. "Yeah, I knew her many years ago, 1957 or 58. She sent you over here to interview me." Clint was perplexed. Why hadn't she mentioned that when she approved the story? "Yes, sir," he replied. "Then you'll do the interview," he added hopefully. "I didn't say that," Woodley snapped. "I wish you'd reconsider. There are lots of your fans out there who would love to hear what you have to say." The old man snorted. "Right. What are you smoking, kid? Nobody gives a fuck about me. I haven't made a film in over 30 years. Nevertheless, there are people who remember." The old man spit again, this time in another direction, away from Clint. Just how the hell do you expect to interview people by sneaking around their houses? You're a prowler, for Christ's sake. You could have got your head blown off. I should call the cops. Sir, with all due respect, I've sent several letters outlining my proposal. The old man coughed again. More smoke billowed. Clint's neck began to hurt. He'd been staring straight up at Woodley, getting an unpleasant, distorted view of the jowly, downturned mouth and oversized nose. From where Clint stood, Woodley appeared to be all nasal hairs and eyebrows. It was not a position from which he liked to negotiate. However, a level playing field was not a Landis Woodley characteristic. Clint got the distinct feeling that he'd been manipulated since he'd knocked on the front door. He craned his neck back up and saw a glass of amber fluid in the old man's hand. Drinking. Before noon. Yeah, that fit the profile. Woodley hadn't responded to Clint's comment about the letters. He seemed to be looking off into the sulphurous distance, deep in thought. She'd be about, 55, 60 years old now? Huh? Still pretty? Still a redhead? Clint realized that Woodley was talking about his boss. That surprised him. He'd never thought of her as anything but an unyielding authority figure. With the vast age difference between them, he'd never been objective enough to wonder if she'd ever been considered attractive. Yeah, still red. She's your boss? Uh-huh. You poor son of a bitch. I'll bet she's tough as nails. You got that right. Landis Woodley, unconcerned about the passage of time, let some more of it pass. Clint noticed that the old man didn't seem to care about flow and dialogue when he spoke. He probably liked those big chunks of silence in his conversations, Clint realized. It put people off. While he waited for Woodley to speak, Clint wondered if the old man had had the hots for Bachman back in the 50s. It presented one hell of a mental picture, and he stifled a laugh. Cash, the old man said. Excuse me, it's got to be cash. I have a check from my magazine, Clint stammered. No checks, Cash. Woodley was as blunt as an old sword. He had a marvelous voice, and he used it to great advantage. Clint, with his community college degree in journalism and 2 years on the job, was no match. He thought about it. The old man gave him all the time he needed. Yeah, I can do cash if you insist, but I'd rather not. Shit, Clint thought. I'll have to go down to the ATM for my 100, back to the office, then over to the publications bank to cash their check. He glanced at his watch. With traffic, it's a couple of hours. Damn, half the day wasted, then I have to drive all the way back here. Woodley spit again. Well, I'd rather not waste my time talking to you. Clint watched the gob sail past him. Okay, I'll get the cash. Go get it now. I'll be here. But take it or leave it. I'll take it. The old man went back inside. Clint heard the door close. Thanks a lot, you old turd. Clint Stockbern had grown up with monsters and parlayed his knowledge of all things creepy into a job writing for his favorite publication, Monster Magazine. As a youth, he'd built plastic models of the Wolfman, Frankenstein, and Dracula. The walls of his room were adorned with lurid movie posters and lobby cards. The stranger the better. Creatures carrying half-clad women were his specialty. A robot holding a woman in a skin-tight spacesuit. A werewolf carrying a blonde bombshell back into the swamp. A look of utter depravity on his face. These were the things Clint cherished. The inference was always the same. These monsters were going to do it with the women. Those horrible claws were going to caress her breasts. Those fangs were going to... It didn't matter. He loved the come-on, the promise of mystery. The movies were never as good as the posters, of course. Usually the scene depicted never occurred in the film. His imagination always created a better story than the one up on the screen anyway. In the end, he was usually disappointed. He graduated from posters to other, more advanced items of memorabilia. At a shop in Burbank, he bought props, old scripts, and pictures of his favorites. He studied journalism in junior college and took his share of film courses. His beloved creatures were never far behind. When he applied to Monster magazine, he had no idea that he'd be hired just 6 weeks later and sent out on one great assignment after another. He'd done profiles on all his favorite filmmakers: Todd Browning, Ray Harryhausen, William Castle, Roger Corman, and more. The enthusiasm of writers like Clint kept the magazine afloat. The Landis Woodley story was Clint's idea. Roberta gave him her blessing and sent him on his way. She never said anything about having actually known the old man. Later that day, Clint stood at the front door of Woodley's house. This time his response came much quicker. Once again the view window opened, once again the bloodshot eyes. "Yeah?" the old man growled. He's not making this easy, Clint thought. He can't have forgotten already. It's only been a few hours. "It's me, sir, Clint Stockbern." "What do you want?" "I've got the money." "Let me see it." Clint held up the packet of cash to the viewplate. $600. The viewplate slammed shut, the locks began to turn, and a half-minute later the big door groaned open. Clint got the feeling that the old arch-topped entry hated to be used. It shrieked and moaned with an almost human quality. Landis stood in the doorway, a smaller man than Clint had expected, but every bit as feisty and unpleasant. "Give it." Clint passed him the packet. Woodley shoved it in a pocket without comment. Clint watched and waited, his reporter's senses taking in everything. Woodley clutched a spit-soaked cigar and a cheap ballpoint pen, giving each equal physical attention. What is he writing, Clint wondered. A new screenplay. The afternoon came alive with possibilities. The old man wore a maroon 50s-style racetrack flash sports shirt and a pair of wrinkled grey pants. Everything he wore was shiny and threadbare, just like most of the upholstered furniture in the house. The frown never left his aged television face. Lines, almost too many for one lifetime, crisscrossed that landscape in angry vectors. He'd combed what little hair he had left from the sides of his head across the top, giving it a thin, greasy blanket of yellowish-white thatch. It seemed an ill-advised hairstyle for Landis, one that only made him appear even more cheap and depraved. His eyes were deep-set in his pale face, ruthlessly scanning for carrion, 2 red wet spots in a gaunt mask. He stepped aside and drew his arm across his chest. "Come in, kid," he mumbled. Clint followed him into another world. As Woodley shuffled a few paces ahead of Clint, the young man could see that Woodley was wearing battered bedroom slippers instead of shoes. Once inside, the first thing Clint noticed was the smell. An oppressive atmosphere of mustiness and decay permeated the high-ceilinged rooms. Air had been denied circulation here for a long time. Clint had been in old people's houses before, and they all had that peculiar closed-in odor. His grandmother's house smelled like that, except that hers had the subtle bouquet of mothballs in addition to the dusty stillness. Here, in Woodley's horror hotel, the mothballs had been replaced by the sour scent of cheap cigars and rot-gut whiskey. And something else, too, something unclean and animal, a fetid corporeal stench. Clint guessed the place hadn't been cleaned in years. The interior of Woodley's house resembled a Gothic rummage sale furnished primarily from film sets. Oversized wooden chairs, a standing suit of armor, a styrofoam coat of arms, some faded plastic plants. Like the movies he'd made, the mansion was a low-budget, Fright Night turkey, the second feature at a drive-in in some dismal town where there was nothing better to do on Saturday night. It reminded Clint of the old man's cinematic visions and his own earliest memories. He had learned something about himself watching that twisted crap, something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. He discovered that he loved to be scared. "Isn't that the Iron Lady from I Married a Vampire?" Clint asked. Fake blood, now the color of dried chocolate, flowed down the side of it in gaudy patterns. "Yeah, I used it in Attack of the Haunted Saucer too," Landis said through phlegm-clogged vocal cords. Clint could hear the old man wheeze. He sounded like he had emphysema. Buzzy Haller built it. We loved it so much we tried to use it in every damn picture. The thing photographed great. It's made of plywood and polyurethane foam. Attack of the Haunted Saucer is one of my all-time favorites, Clint said. Yeah, Landis coughed. A real piece of work. Did you read what the New Yorker said? They called it the worst movie of all time. Can you imagine that? Yeah, I've heard it called that, but I don't see it that way. I recently saw it at a festival of 50s horror films, and the audience loved it. Landis rummaged through some papers and ignored him. He picked up a clipping and read, Woodley's trashy production is a depressing, hopelessly conducted farce. The acting, sets, plot, camera work, and laughable special effects all bear his indelible stamp of ugly cheapness. He makes Ed Wood look like Kurosawa, a big fat piece of crap. He looked up at Clint and scowled. Worst movie of all time. Fuck them. What do they know? Clint was about to answer when Woodley continued. What these guys don't realize is that Attack of the Haunted Saucer was a quickie. I don't argue that, but I defy anybody to make a feature-length movie for $5,000 in 3 days and have it show a profit. Even in 1956, which was a great year for low budgets, that was a record. Landis's rage kept like bottled steam. Clint knew it was a ponderous cross for the retired filmmaker to bear, and he decided to keep the interview light until the end. They sat facing each other on an ancient sofa that belched and farted when Clint eased his slim frame into it. The old man collapsed into a battered vinyl universal lounger. A half-full bottle of generic whiskey dominated the tiny end table next to him. Woodley made no attempt to hide the fact that he enjoyed drinking the world's cheapest booze in the middle of the afternoon. Want some? He wheezed. Clint shook his head. I guess you want to hear about Saucer, the so-called worst movie of all time, Landis blurted out to Clint's surprise. Yeah, among other things. How do you feel about that? Clint asked, getting his notebook out and depressing the record button on his cassette machine. Well, you gotta understand, making movies was different in those days. A flutter of wings and a high-pitched shriek interrupted Woodley and drove Clint from his chair in a burst of panic. Something sailed over his head. Woodley laughed, his throaty guffaw thick and mean. If you're a red-blooded horror fan, you won't mind my bats. There's only a couple of them left, and they aren't rabid. Clint noticed his hand shaking. He sat back down, his eyes scanning the rafters overhead. Scared the shit out of you, didn't it? Woodley said. Yes, sir, it did. Good. Scaring people has been my main gig for over 50 years, and I still get a kick out of it. You were saying that making movies was different in those days, Clint prompted. Right. Well, all I can tell you is that we had to improvise all the time. We had to think on our feet. I'd like to see Spielberg or Lucas try to pull off some of the stuff we did. Forget it. Anybody can make a movie for $50 million. Hell, it's as simple as making a few phone calls. In those days, we were forced to really get creative. We put our balls on the line every time. These guys today don't have a clue. Clint nodded. Good start. Now let's get the old fart to open up. What was your favorite film to work on? Woodley took a sip of the whiskey. It had been fermenting in the glass, looking like a curious mixture of motor oil and urine. Clint noticed a slick on top. The old man's frown straightened slightly, then cracked. What passed for a smile on Landis Woodley's face appeared as joyless as a dog baring its teeth. Favorite film? Let's see. Probably Blood Ghouls of Malibu. We got to work on the beach all day on that one, plus the late Jonathan Luboff was such a joy to work with. He was the consummate pro, always knew what to do. We never had to waste any time with him, not like that idiot Tad Kingston. Kingston gave you problems? Landis snorted unhealthily. He was a royal pain in the arse. Of course, the kids loved him, so we had to use him. He did most of his acting with his hair. Clint laughed. The old man had made a joke. It was the last thing he'd expected. Did Buzzy Haller have anything to do with that hair? No, that's about the only thing he didn't have a hand in. The man was a real genius. He worked on every one of my productions, and believe me, if he couldn't do it, it couldn't be done. We were pretty close, used to play poker every week. He lived over at the Roosevelt Arms, a basement apartment. The Roosevelt's a shithole, you know. Clint nodded. Buzzy Haller became a true legend around Hollywood, and his special effects work ranked right up there with the best of them in the early days. It was Buzzy's misfortune to fall in with the B-movie people, and he never had a decent budget to work with. Also, Haller had a drinking problem. Judging from the look of Landis Woodley, it must have been the one true bond that held their friendship together. It seemed the height of irony that, in this town of successful drunks and dreamers, alcohol and imagination kept Buzzy Haller from working until he killed himself. Clint decided not to broach the subject of Buzzy's suicide. Tell me about Luboff. Jonathan was a master. He knew what to do when the cameras were rolling, I'll tell you that. Unfortunately, the man had a major drug problem. He was addicted to heroin for 20 years. It was starting to affect his work toward the end. Landis paused to relight his cigar. You helped Luboff, didn't you? Yeah, I dragged him to the hospital a couple of times so he could kick. The guy was a real mess. You'd think that being a veteran actor with hundreds of films to his credit, the damn Screen Actors Guild would have covered his medical expenses, but they couldn't have cared less. It was a real battle, but eventually we got them to cave in and foot a small part of the bill. You know, I was probably the only guy in Hollywood who gave two shits for Jonathan Luboff in the later years of his life. Clint nodded. Some of his early work, like Curse of Nosferatu and Dr. Death, is Hall of Fame stuff. They loved his accent. That Eastern European double talk was the most imitated shit in town for a while. He was big box office too at one time. The man was an institution. Of course, at the end he was broke and strung out. Kinda sad, you know what I mean? When Luboff was in the hospital, we put together a benefit at some theater downtown. We showed a few of his films. And nobody came. Not one fucking person. Can you believe it? We didn't sell a single ticket. That's the way this town takes care of its own. But I will say this, the man was a class act, a sweetheart. Everybody in the crew loved him. The old man seemed to be softening. His voice became less hostile. Talking about Luboff had opened a door. Those scum-sucking pigs who ran the major studios forced us all out of business. The old man's voice cracked. They drove that poor bastard Luboff to drugs, and Buzzy to drink. In Haller's case, they said it was suicide. And there was a note. I saw it. It was in his own handwriting. But his body was never found. Landis coughed again, spraying the air in front of him with an unhealthy blizzard of sepia-toned particles. Clint leaned back. Right, no body. To tell you the truth, I'm not sure I believe it even now. I guess it is possible that he went and threw himself off a cliff or into the ocean or something like that. But I wouldn't be surprised to see old Buzz walk in here right now. Clint checked his notes. He was a good friend, wasn't he? None better. And he was a real artist too. When it came to clay and latex, he could do anything. He made the monster suit for blood ghouls for $100. The damn thing was so unwieldy that nobody could wear it. So Buzzy ended up playing the monster himself. He had to keep it on all day. We were shooting around the clock. Anybody else would have passed out. Not Buzzy. He built a flexible straw into the headpiece and sipped his vodka tonics for hours. If you watch the finished cut, you'll see the monster starting to weave a little. That's Buzz. Clint smiled. He had seen the finished product, and he knew exactly what Landis was talking about. That was one of my favorite monsters. It really seemed to breathe and have expression. That was the thing about Buzzy. He could make a monster human. If there's nothing human in a monster, it won't scare you much. The trick is, you gotta make the audience see some of themselves in it. That's when you scare the piss out of them. Buzzy knew that. That's why he went the extra mile under all that latex. The old man leaned forward, his breath like kerosene. The more he leaned in, the farther Clint leaned back. Tell me the story about Attack of the Haunted Saucer. You mean Buzzy's effects? Yeah, that's a classic, and I'm sure our readers would love to hear the truth. Woodley sat back in his chair and took another sip of whiskey. Clint relaxed. We'd come to the end of the line on saucers. The budget was gone, we were flat out broke, and I literally had only a few feet of film left. That wouldn't have been so bad, but we still didn't have an ending. We were screwed. I didn't know what I was going to do. We had these spaceships that had to be destroyed to save the Earth, and some footage of Tad Kingston telling Deborah Deluxe not to worry, and that was it. No more money for actors, cameramen, not even a cup of coffee. So Buzzy glued some paper plates together, soaked them in gas from out of my Buick, and set them on fire. He threw them at the camera, and I rolled the last of our film. It wasn't great cinematography, but it gave us an ending. People paid to see that movie too. Clint found himself enjoying the interview. This was just the kind of stuff he'd wanted. The readers would eat it up. The booze had loosened the old man's tongue sufficiently. The time had come for Clint's big scoop, and he felt the tension rise as he wondered how he would get into it. "Ah," Clint stammered, "just last week I was reminded of another film you guys worked on." "Which one?" Clint took a breath. "Well, I was researching another story, and I happened to be reading about the LA County morgue." Landis squinted. "Yeah? And it reminded me of a rumor that's been floating around Hollywood for years." The old man's face froze. His eyes bored into Clint's face like a pair of blue steel drills. "Yeah? What about it?" Clint began to sweat. It surprised him how scared he felt just talking about it. "Well, I was wondering if there was any truth to that rumor." Clint imagined Landis Woodley's goodwill drying up like a desert stream. His voice took on an icy edge. "What rumor is that?" Clint cleared his throat. "The rumor that you used real corpses in Cadaver." Silence. Clint thought he'd blown it. The rumor happened to be one of those old Hollywood chestnuts repeated by every film student since 1957. Like the famous Tijuana donkey story and the Spanish fly myth, it was neither fact nor fiction. It had become legend. "I guess it's time I told the truth about this and got it off my chest," Woodley sighed. "I'm sick of all this bullshit. People have been whispering behind my back for years, and it's been haunting me. That rumor, that story, is what put me out of the feature films business." He stared at Clint, and the young man looked back at him, unblinking. Clint could imagine the old man reading his mind. If he wanted to blame that rumor on why he was drummed out of the movie business, fine. Clint wasn't about to mention the 50 other reasons, starting with the fact that his film stopped making money. Clint knew from discussions with Roberta Bachman that the rumor had actually improved business for a short while. There had been talk that the old man himself had started it. Whether it was true or not, it had kept interest in the film sharp over the years, giving it a whole new cult audience as time went by. The old man cleared his throat and rocked back, warming to the task. "You have to remember the way we made movies back then. Like I said, it was different. There were no rules. We took chances. The budgets were minuscule, time was tight, the business was bizarre. I don't know, looking back, it all seems so grotesque." Clint checked his tape recorder. Landis cleared his throat. "It was Buzzy's idea. He figured out how to get those drawers open. 2, we were shooting at the morgue, and we had to be out by 5 a.m. They let us work the graveyard shift, no pun intended. In those days, you could do a location like that without too much crap. And of course, we were in and out before anybody had a chance to complain. The LA County morgue was a great place to shoot. It had been used in a bunch of cop shows, but never a horror movie. We were the first. I had gotten permission to shoot late night as long as we were out by dawn, when the bodies started coming in from the night before. LA was bad even then. The morgue was a busy place. Landis Woodley stopped, tried to puff on his unlit cigar, and raised an eyebrow. "You ever been to the morgue?" Clint nodded. "Inside?" "Well, no, never inside," Clint replied. "It's a scary place. Smells like a sausage factory in there. They keep it pretty cool, too. I guess that goes without saying. Everything you touch is sort of, I don't know, clammy. Working down there all night was giving all of us the creeps. There was only one guy there, a custodian, and he liked wine. We were basically on our own. Anyway, we were getting 20 shots a night, a breakneck schedule. RKM was breathing down our backs like a pack of goddamn hyenas. They were outgrossing us over at National, making millions on the Unearthly Terror series. There was a war going on between the two film companies. They kept trying to outdo each other in the horror department. We found out that they were using pig's blood and cow brains in Terror, trying to be the scariest, the bloodiest. Well, one thing led to another. Clint heard the bats flutter behind him and fought a natural inclination to duck. He lost. He dived to his side on the couch, keeping his head well below the horizon line of the back of the overstuffed monstrosity that protected him. Shivering with revulsion, he imagined their ugly little black bat feet dancing through his hair, scratching his scalp as they frantically tried to escape. "Those bats bother you, don't they?" Woodley coughed again, violently. He doubled over and gasped for breath in between the spasms. Despite the tremors in his hands, he managed to take another sip of whiskey, calming his convulsing frame. "I love 'em," Woodley said at last, sliding back into the naugahyde backrest of his adjustable universal lounger. "They're fourth generation, you know. They've been scaring chumps like you for years." Clint blinked. What could he say? He righted himself and took a peek over his shoulder. The bats had settled. He compulsively checked his tape recorder yet again. "Yeah, they bother me. Bats give me the creeps. I didn't expect it, you know," Clint said. Woodley nodded. He knew. "Would you like to move outside and finish the interview out on the deck?" Clint asked, knowing what the answer would be. Woodley shook his head defiantly, then plowed ahead with his story as if the question had never been asked. "We were under the gun, over budget, the usual situation. My special effects budget was about $100. You can't make a good monster for that price, at least one that will scare people. Shit. I had 2 zombies in full makeup, Buzzy Haller and some other guy, some beatnik. I'd used them in every shot, and I was concerned that the audience would recognize the same 2 faces. I needed something different. We were shooting a scene where one of the cadavers rises up from the slab and strangles Tad Kingston, who was playing his usual dimwit teenager role. I couldn't have Buzzy do it, because he'd been in the last shot. The other guy was no good either. I'd overexposed the both of them. There was supposed to be a whole army of zombies, and I was trying to make 2 seem like 50. So Buzzy gets this wild idea to use some of the real cadavers. They keep 'em in this big refrigerated vault with drawers that slide out. Clint shivered, visualizing. "Jesus," he muttered. Woodley smiled. "Yeah. So Buzzy figures out how to get the drawers open. They had every kind of corpse you could imagine. Some of them were pretty horrible, I'll tell you. We checked about 5 of them until we found this one guy who was really ripe. I think he was an itinerant, a bum. God knows what he died from. He'd been dead for a while, that was obvious. I even remember the drawer number, I don't know why. Sometimes you remember little details like that years later. It was drawer 66, like in Get Your Kicks on Route 66. So Buzzy hauls him out, gets behind him and... you sure you want to hear this?" Yes, absolutely. Please go on. He works him like a marionette. Holy shit, Clint whispered. He resisted the urge to check the cassette machine again. This guy stank. I don't know how Buzzy did it. He was a trooper, or one sick puppy. Probably a little of both. He had to work like hell to get the guy to bend. Rigor mortis, you know. It was positively ghastly, if I do say so myself. Landis smiled again, thin, dry lips parted, revealing stained teeth. Pale, receding gums flashed. It was the smile of a very old and sick predator. I could light my cigar, you know. The smoke keeps 'em away. What? Clint asked. The bats. The bats. Yeah, they can't stand the smoke. It makes them keep their distance. Should I light up? Clint nodded. Landis chuckled. Another first. Works every time, he smirked, his lungs rattling. So where was I? Oh yeah. Kingston balked. I can't say that I blame him. He threatened to walk out on the whole production, said he had standards. Ha, that's a laugh. I wound up offering him more money. How much? Chump change, the old man said with obvious disgust. That turkey would do anything for money. Believe me, I know. He did it? Damn right he did it. In one take. Kingston should have gotten the Academy Award for that, except that he wasn't acting. He was scared shitless. The guy looked great on film, the dead guy, not Kingston. He wound up being the star of the picture. We used him in at least 20 shots, and he never complained. Landis paused, waiting for a laugh, then continued. We even used a few of his dead buddies. Easiest bunch I ever worked with. Real pros. They worked cheap, too. Clint's jaw dropped. Never in his wildest dreams did he think he would get all this. But there it was, immortalized on tape. Did the old man tell the truth? Could this be just another one of his scare tactics? Are you serious? Clint asked. As a heart attack, Woodley replied. He edged forward on his seat. I go in for a close-up. Chet Bronsky is the cameraman, a prince, and he's pulling in just as Buzzy thumbs one of the eyes open. I'll tell you, we all shuddered to see what was going to happen. The camera zooms in and... He paused. And it's full of worms. Landis flopped back in his lounger again. He raised his glass to his lips, then stopped, leveling his gaze into Clint's face. That shot made the movie, he said, then swallowed the last of the whiskey. Worms? Clint whispered. Yeah, squirming like amoebas. They started coming out, right on cue, and I held that close-up for at least 60 seconds. On screen, it seemed like a half an hour. People in the theaters shrank down in their seats and gasped. Christ, what a moment. I was at the Royal Theatre in Anaheim for the premiere. In those days, you always opened out of town and people started screaming. Some lady barfed. It was my crowning achievement on film. I scared the shit out of him. He put the glass down and tapped his knee. That's my business, scaring people. That poor son of a bitch was a movie star after he was dead. Can you believe that? Clint shook his head. I guess you could say people were dying to get in my flicks, the old man rasped, more coughing laughter spraying from his mouth. Landis Woodley's eyes glimmered. Pig's eyes, Clint thought. Cruel and tiny, they were perpetually squinting out at an unforgiving world. Cadaver went on to become my highest-grossing movie ever, the sandpaper voice continued. It played the drive-ins for years. I still see it on late-night TV. I should have gone on to bigger and better things, but that shyster Saul Kravitz talked me into those idiotic rock movies. Nothing but trouble. Music stinks. It's death at the box office. These kids, these teenagers, they don't spend money, they steal. I lost so much of my own money on Big Rock Beat, I almost went out of business. I learned my lesson. There's nothing like scaring people. They never get sick of it. That's the truth. You know the sound of a gunshot? The old man asked. Clint nodded. Everybody overdubs a big boom, Woodley pointed out. It's a standard sound effect. Every library has dozens of them. What I did in Snuff Addict was, in the scene where the guy kills the chick, I let the actual sound of the gun, a crack, stay in. That evil little crack is nasty. That sound scares people more than those cannons you hear in all the movies now. Listen to a real gun, it sounds like pop. And it's ominous. Sometimes when you want to scare someone, less is more. The real fear is up here, he tapped his head, inside your brain. Clint nodded. What do you think scares people the most? Landis considered the question, then said, Many people fear the dark, you know, and movie theaters are dark. I don't know. They're afraid of dying, of being alone. But isn't that what happens to you when you pay your way in and sit there staring at the wall? Your own life is suspended, forgotten temporarily. You huddle in the dark, alone, waiting to be seduced by what's up there on the screen. He tried to light his cigar, but it was too wet and short to function. He gave up and put it down with a sigh, as if his whole life was like that now, a used-up cheap cigar. People are scared of what they don't understand, he continued. I scare people because no one has ever understood me. Snuff Addict was a very disturbing film. Clint had seen it, of course. Woodley made it during the 1961-65 era, a very dark time for him. He'd been reduced to making skin flicks, peep show loops, and worse. Landis had, once again, preyed on people's worst perversions, and his sick movies went for the jugular even then. He sought out the strange, the bizarre, the most depraved fetishes for his subject matter. It ultimately proved too much for even the porn houses. Clint wondered if Snuff Addict contained a real murder. Now that he knew the truth about Woodley, nothing was out of the question. In the early 70s, when the sex film industry was somewhat legitimized, the world left Landis Woodley in the cold once again. After Cadaver and the ill-advised Big Rock Beat, he only made one more legitimate feature. The rarely seen Cold Flesh Eaters, a waste of celluloid in every critic's book. The rapidly diminishing quality of his work eventually eroded what little credibility he had, and in a few short years, Landis's name meant box office death. You could only fool people so many times, then they got wise. Sitting across from the old man, Clint felt himself becoming strangely detached. He felt as if he'd stepped outside the scene, watching himself doing the interview. He knew everything about Landis Woodley that had been made public. His infamous career, his brief success, his spectacular failures, his scandals, and his well-documented perversions. Tip of the iceberg, Clint thought. Those bats are only active at night. That's why I keep it so dark in here, Woodley said, changing gears again. Clint nodded. The old man seemed as much a creature of the dark as the bats. They eat everything. The old man's conversation had a peculiar kind of logic to it once Clint began to recognize the pattern. There could be only one topic, whether he talked about the bats, the film industry, Buzzy Haller, the IRS, or dead bodies. The topic was fear. Landis Woodley appeared obsessed with it. Fear. Clint was the addict and Woodley the dealer. Nobody ever found out, of course, and we all took an oath of silence. The shoot was wrapped up in 3 days, and that was it. The censors were all over that picture, though, as if they knew something which they didn't. I had to cut some stuff, but we still out-bloodied National. RKM was happy, and we brought home a winner. Cadaver was your apex? Woodley nodded. Outside the windows the sun was setting. He'd noticed the lengthening shadows and the diminishing light before Clint, and was reveling in it. In the dark, he came alive. Woodley leaned forward. It's a hell of a world, isn't it? When the pinnacle of a man's life's work is a low-budget horror movie full of real corpses. He looked at Clint as if he expected a response. Clint remained silent. You want to see some footage? Clint cocked his head. Did he hear that right? Did the old man want to show him some film? I got some outtakes, some footage the censors made me take out. They said it was too gory, not suitable for public viewing. Those wimps, they used to run this town. Shit, you couldn't even say the word sex until 1967. I got some great stuff. Buzzy and the corpses at the morgue, some mutilation stuff. Mutilation stuff? Clint almost said something, then caught himself. What had they been doing down in the abattoir? Carving people up. Sure, I'd love to, he heard himself say. Can I bring a photographer? The thought of watching those grainy old black and white films full of real corpses, alone in this house with the old man, made him uneasy. No photographers, just you. Clint looked a shade doubtful, and the old man picked up on it. I've got stills, posters, half-sheets, lobby cards, scripts, everything. Your article would really kick some butt. Maybe you could make some real money. You want to make money, don't you, kid? Clint nodded. Good, thought so, Woodley rasped. You've got a hell of a start. Come back tomorrow night, 9 o'clock. I'll show you some shit that'll make your hair stand up. Landis busied himself pouring another shot of booze. A strange noise knifed up from below. Clint was about to turn off his tape recorder and end the interview when the sound froze him. It sounded like a moan, a painful, horrible, half-human moan. What the hell was that? Clint asked. Woodley's face blanched. The sound had clearly alarmed him as well. He spilled a portion of his drink on the already stained rug at his feet. His head turned to one side like a dog listening to a violin. The moan came up again, low and pitiable, from beneath their feet. It was the most unpleasant and disconcerting sound that Clint Stockbern had ever heard. What is that? He asked again. Clint stood up, suddenly acutely aware that it was no longer light outside. Landis looked up at him. He was still seated, still in denial. You heard it too? Clint nodded. Christ, I thought I was the only one, Landis growled. I thought it was in my mind. Clint surveyed the room. The bats were still. Only the sound of the moaning disturbed the quiet. It came again, the low frequency of it raising Clint's blood pressure another few notches. Landis rose slowly from his chair. His hands trembled even as they grasped the arms. His fingernails, Clint noticed, were too long. Their color was an unhealthy yellow. Woodley looked to the hallway, his mind far away. It's coming from beneath us, Clint whispered. Yeah, Landis croaked. What's down there? The projection room. There shouldn't be anyone down there. I keep it locked up. That's where I store all the films. Landis said the words Clint didn't want to hear. Let's go down and take a look. Clint turned back to the old man. I don't think so. What are you scared? Landis leered. Clint considered turning around and walking out, but he didn't want to destroy the relationship he'd spent all day nurturing. Suddenly it occurred to him that this could be another one of the old man's tricks, a test to see how much Clint could take. Well, Clint felt like saying yes, and letting it go at that, but the fear excited him to new heights. Something inside would force him down there, he knew. Something would make him face more fear. Okay, he said. They descended the steps carefully. Clint stayed close behind Woodley, his eyes darting from corner to corner. The stairs were narrow and creaked like stage props, the light stingy and unreliable. Clint's hands tingled. Watch out, my pet owls are in here, Woodley droned. Almost on cue, wings beat through the air in front of them. Unlike the bats, these wings were large and dry, moving across the ceiling in long, feathery flaps. Clint ducked. Christ, they're big, Clint gasped as one sailed past his head. Ketupa owls. I get 'em from Central Africa. They reached the bottom of the steps and entered a long room with a door at the far end. Light came from a bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. It cast sharp shadows, well-defined and ugly, on the discolored walls. It smelled like a basement. Clint stepped on something that crunched under his foot. What the hell? Aren't these bones? They eat mice whole and spit up the hair and bones afterward. Clint winced and tried to avoid stepping on the little bundles of horror. Landis, ever the keen observer, said, "Are you all right? You look a little pale." Clint wiped his face with his hand and nodded. "Yeah, I'm fine. Do you have rats?" "Nah, the owls get 'em." They crossed the room and opened the door. Landis led the way into a large, windowless, rectangular room. A movie screen occupied the far end, with several rows of theatre seats arranged in front of it at a discreet distance. A huge old commercial projector, the kind used in movie theatres in the 50s, sat on a table behind the rows of seats. It was a grey metal monstrosity, all reels and gears, and it dominated the back of the room like an evil robot. "I watch my old movies down here," the old man said. "I've got original prints of all of them, first-class stuff. The seats and projector are from the old Avalon Theatre in Westwood." "Beautiful, huh?" "Yeah, nice," Clint replied. The thought of the old man down here alone at night, watching those horrible old movies with real corpses in them, while the projector flickered behind him, was too much. The room fascinated Clint. It heightened his fear, providing a rich growth medium of mystery. He could imagine the wet cigar and the whiskey, the bloodshot eyes staring up at the images of Buzzy Haller and Tad Kingston as they manipulated the legions of the dead. He shook his head to clear away the demons. "Great seats, great theatres, and some damn good movies," Landis muttered. It was another era. Clint nodded. "These seats are from the balcony. I wonder how many kids—" The moan came again, cutting the old man off like a clap of thunder. It was loud in here, unnaturally loud, and in it Clint could hear the unmistakable sound of pain. Hideous and guttural, it rose from the floor like a wounded spirit. It hung in the air, slowly fading away, as if it were recorded in an echo chamber. Clint held his breath. "Holy shit," he whispered. "It's coming from the floor. It sounds like someone's dying down there. Is there a sub-basement?" Landis shook his head. "A crawl space. Just a dirt floor crawl space." Clint didn't want to see the crawl space. He didn't even want to know it existed. What if the old man wanted to investigate further? Woodley pulled back a filthy Persian rug to reveal a trapdoor in the floor. "That's the way down," Woodley said. "You want to look?" Clint shook his head. "Maybe some other time." "No taste for the creepy crawlies, eh, kid?" "I don't blame you. I've never looked down there myself. It's probably the wind. Maybe it broke through down there somewhere, and it's swirling around under the house." Clint knew it wasn't the wind. That kind of thinking usually got guys killed in horror movies. The wind doesn't make your heart stop beating or bring acid to your mouth. The wind isn't in pain. He cleared his throat and asked, "Have you ever heard that sound before?" The old man nodded. "Yeah, a long time ago."